Hi guys, and welcome to HTP Storytime, the show where we pick short stories out of the cursed fedora, and we read them, and learn a bit about ourselves, and a bit about other people as well. And we learn a bit about stories, and the tales of people from other nations, and other social circles, and classes. Okay, and today we are going to be reading... Let's see, that's a good one. Taste by Roald Dahl. A story about a man with a friend, and I think a friend that we've all had. One of those people where if you tell them a story, or you tell them a story, something you did or someplace you went, they've always got to one-up you, you know? They've always have to done it 10 times better, or 100 times fancier place, or 1,000 times quicker, time-wise, perhaps. Yes. And you know what the worst part about those friends is you don't know if they're actually lying. You know, you feel like they're lying. You feel like they're fibbing to one-up you intentionally. But you're never quite sure. Maybe they are just that good, and your accomplishments are, in fact, a pile of duty, you know? But what if you were to set up a little trap for said friend, you know? With the chance that he might fall into that trap, and you trap him in a lie, or, you know... Imagine if you can just put him in a situation where you can jump up and point in his face and go, I knew all along, you know? So that's what that story is about tonight. Taste by Roald Dahl. So let's have a look. Okay, Taste by Roald Dahl, written in 1951. There were 6 of us to dinner that night at Mike Schofield's house in London. Mike and his wife and daughter, my wife and I, and a man called Richard Pratt. Foreshadowing. Richard Pratt was a famous gourmet. He was president of a small society known as the Epicures, and each month he circulated privately to its members a pamphlet on food and wines. He organized dinners where sumptuous dishes and rare wines were served. He refused to smoke for fear of harming his palate, and when discussing a wine, he had a curious, rather droll habit of referring to it as though it were a living being. "Oh, a prudent wine," he would say, "rather diffident and evasive, but quite prudent." Or, "A good-humoured wine, benevolent and cheerful, slightly obscene, perhaps, but nonetheless good-humoured." Do we all know people like that? We all know people like that, right? Anyway, I had been to dinner at Mike's twice before when Richard Pratt was there, and on each occasion Mike and his wife had gone out of their way to produce a special meal for the famous gourmet. And this one, clearly, was to be no exception. The moment we entered the dining room, I could see that the table was laid for a feast. The tall candles, the yellow roses, the quantity of shining silver, the 3 wine glasses to each person. Jeez. 3 wine glasses to each person, is that... that is a British stereotype I've never heard about. Or a rich habit. I find the sentence quite rich. Anyway, 3 glasses to each person, and above all, the faint scent of roasting meat from the kitchen. As we sat down, I remembered that on both Richard Pratt's previous visits, Mike had played a little betting game with him over the claret, challenging him to name its breed and its vintage. Pratt had replied that that should not be difficult, provided it was one of the great years. Mike had then bet him a case of the wine in question that he could not do it. Pratt had accepted and had won both times. See what I said about you don't know if these people are liars or if they're really that good, right? Hectic. Anyway, tonight I felt sure that the little game would be played over again, for Mike was quite willing to lose the bet in order to prove that his wine was good enough to be recognized. And Pratt, for his part, seemed to take a grave, restrained pleasure in displaying his knowledge. Yeah, of course, guy. The meal began with a plate of whitebait, fried very crisp in butter, and to go with it there was a Moselle. Mike got up and poured the wine himself, and when he sat down again, I could see that he was watching Richard Pratt. He had set the bottle in front of me so that I could read the label. It said Geiersley, Olegsburg, 1945. He leaned over and whispered to me that Geiersley was a tiny village in the Moselle, almost unknown outside Germany. He said that this wine we were drinking was something unusual, that the output of the vineyard was so small that it was almost impossible for a stranger to get any of it. Yeah, famous last words. I have a foolproof plan. He had visited Geiersley personally the previous summer in order to obtain the few dozen bottles that they had finally allowed him to have. I doubt anyone else in the country has any of it at the moment, he said. I saw him glance again at Richard Pratt. Great thing about Moselle, he continued, raising his voice. I doubt anyone else in the country has any of it at the moment, he said. I saw him glance again at Richard Pratt. The great thing about Moselle, he continued, raising his voice, it's the perfect wine to serve before a claret. A lot of people serve a Rhine wine instead, but that's because they don't know any better. A Rhine wine will kill a delicate claret. You know that? It's barbaric to serve a Rhine before a claret, but a Moselle, Moselle is exactly right. Ugh. I just get up and go home, right then and there, you know. Poop my pants at the dinner table and just make my excuses. That's how I'd roll. Yes. Now, Mike Schofield was an amiable, middle-aged man, but he was a stockbroker. To be precise, he was a jobber in the stock market, and like a number of his kind, he seemed to be somewhat embarrassed, almost ashamed to find that he had so much money with so slight a talent. Can't we say that about all bankers, guys? Come on. In his heart, he knew that he was not really much more than a bookmaker, an unctuous, infinitely respectable, secretly unscrupulous bookmaker, and he knew that his friends knew it too. So he was seeking now to become a man of culture. Guys, this is from 1951, okay? Not that kind of man of culture. Okay. So he was seeking now to become a man of culture, to cultivate a literary and aesthetic taste, to collect paintings, music, books, and all the rest of it. His little sermon about Rhine wine and Moselle was a part of this thing, this culture that he sought. You know, everybody just wants to fit in, right? A charming little wine, don't you think? He said. He was still watching Richard Pratt. I could see him give a rapid, furtive glance down the table, each time he dropped his head to take a mouthful of whitebait. I could almost feel him waiting for the moment when Pratt would take his first sip and look up from his glass with a smile of pleasure, of astonishment, perhaps even wonder, and there would be a discussion, and Mike would tell him about the village of Geiersley. Right? Guys, this guy's trying to lay a trap. He thinks this guy's not going to know the wine. Let's see what happens. Yeah. His expectations are already... dis bly hoog, my maat. Dis bly hoog. Okay. But Richard Pratt did not taste his wine. He was completely engrossed in conversation with Mike's 18-year-old daughter, Louise. Hey, guys. He was half turned towards her, smiling at her, telling her, so far as I could gather, some story about a chef in a Paris restaurant. As he spoke, he leaned closer and closer to her, seeming in his eagerness almost to impinge upon her. That's our word for the day. And the poor girl leaned as far as she could away from him, nodding politely, rather desperately, and looking not at his face, but at the topmost button of his dinner jacket. We finished our fish, and the maid came around removing the plates. When she came to Pratt, she saw that he had not yet touched his food, so she hesitated, and Pratt noticed her. He waved her away, broke off his conversation, and quickly began to eat, popping the little crisp brown fish quickly into his mouth with rapid jabbing movements of his fork. Then when he had finished, he reached for his glass, and in 2 short swallows he tipped the wine down his throat and turned immediately to resume his conversation with Louise Schofield. Guys, this poor man. Mike saw it all. I was conscious of him sitting there, very still, containing himself, looking at his guest. His round, jovial face seemed to have loosened slightly and to sag, but he contained himself and was still and said nothing. Soon the maid came forward with the second course. This was a large roast of beef. She placed it on the table in front of Mike, who stood up and carved it, cutting the slices very thin, laying them gently on the plates for the maid to take around. When he had served everyone, including himself, he put down the carving knife and leaned forward with both hands on the edge of the table. Now, he said, speaking to all of us, but looking at Richard Pratt's face. Now for the claret. I must go and fetch the claret, if you'll excuse me. You go and fetch it, Mike, I said. Where is it? In my study, with the cork out, breathing. Why the study? Acquiring room temperature, of course. It's been there 24 hours. But why the study? It's the best place in the house. Richard helped me choose it last time he was here. At the sound of his name, Pratt looked around. That's right, isn't it? Mike said. Yes, Pratt answered, nodding gravely. That's right. On top of the green filing cabinet in my study, Mike said. That's the place we chose, a draft-free spot in a room with an even temperature. Excuse me now, will you? While I fetch it. The thought of another wine to play with had restored his humor, and he'd hurried out the door, to return a minute later, more slowly, walking softly, holding in both hands a wine basket in which a dark bottle lay. The label was out of sight, facing downwards. Now, he cried, as he came towards the table, what about this one, Richard? You'll never name this one. Richard Pratt turned slowly and looked up at Mike. Then his eyes travelled down to the bottle nestling in its small wicker basket, and he raised his eyebrows, a slight supercilious arching of the brows, and with it a pushing outwards of the wet lower lip, suddenly imperious and ugly. You'll never get it, Mike said. Not in 100 years. A claret? Richard Pratt asked, condescending. Of course. I assume, then, that it's from one of the smaller vineyards? Maybe it is, Richard, and then again, maybe it isn't. But is it a good year, one of the great years? Yes, I guarantee that. Then it shouldn't be too difficult, Richard Pratt said, drawling his words, looking exceedingly bored, except that, to me, there was something strange about his drawling and his boredom. Between the eyes a shadow of something evil, and in his bearing an intentness that gave me a faint sense of uneasiness as I watched him. This one is really rather difficult, Mike said. I won't force you to bet on this one. Indeed, and why not? Again, the slow arching brows, the cool, intent look. What is Mr. Pratt hiding here, guys? The cool intent, because it's difficult. That's not very complimentary to me, you know. My dear man, Mike said, I'll bet you with pleasure, if that's what you wish. Oh, it shouldn't be too hard to name it. You mean you want to bet? I'm perfectly willing to bet, Richard Pratt said. All right then, we'll have the usual, a case of the wine itself. You don't think I'll be able to name it, do you? As a matter of fact, and with all due respect, I don't, Mike said. He was making some effort to remain polite, but Pratt was not bothering overmuch to conceal his contempt for the whole proceeding. And yet, curiously, his next question seemed to betray a certain interest. Would you like to increase the bet? No, Richard, a case is plenty. Would you like to bet 50 cases? That would be silly. Mike stood very still behind his chair at the head of the table, carefully holding the bottle in its ridiculous wicker basket. There was a trace of whiteness around his nostrils now, and his mouth was shut very tight. Pratt was lolling back in his chair, looking up at him, the eyebrows raised, the eyes half closed, a little smile touching the corners of his lips, and again I saw, or thought I saw, something distinctly disturbing about the man's face. That shadow of intentness between the eyes, and in the eyes themselves, right in their centers where it was black, a small, slow spark of shrewdness, hiding in the eyes, ladies and gentlemen. So you don't want to increase the bet? As far as I'm concerned, old man, I don't give a damn, Mike said. I'll bet you anything you like. The three women and I sat quietly, watching the two men. Mike's wife was becoming annoyed. Her mouth had gone sour, and I felt that at any moment she was going to interrupt. Our roast beef lay before us on our plates, slowly steaming. So, you'll bet me anything I like? That's what I said. I'll bet you anything you damn well please. If you want to make an issue out of it. Even £10,000? Certainly I will, if that's the way you want it. Mike was more confident now. He knew quite well that he could call any sum Pratt cared to mention. So you say I can name the bet? Pratt asked again. That's what I said. There was a pause while Pratt looked slowly around the table, first at me, then at the three women, each in turn. He appeared to be reminding us that we were witnesses to the offer. Mike, Mrs. Schofield said, Mike, why don't we stop this nonsense and eat our food? It's getting cold. But it isn't nonsense, Pratt told her evenly. We're making a little bet. I noticed the maid standing in the background, holding a dish of vegetables and wondering whether to come forward with them or not. All right then, Pratt said. I'll tell you what I want you to bet. Come on then, Mike said, rather reckless. I don't give a damn what it is. You're on. Pratt nodded. And again the little smile moved the corners of his lips, and then quite slowly, looking at Mike all the time, he said, I want you to bet me the hand of your daughter in marriage. The balls at this guy, ladies and gentlemen. Louise Schofield gave a jump. Hey, she cried, no, that's not funny. Look here, Daddy, that's not funny at all. No, dear, Mother said, they're only joking. I'm not joking. Richard Pratt said. It's ridiculous, Mike said. He was off balance again now. You said you'd bet anything I liked. Oh, sorry. You said you'd bet anything I liked. I meant money. You didn't say money. That's what I meant. Then it's a pity you didn't say it. But anyway, if you wish to go back on your offer, that's quite all right with me. It's not a question of going back on my offer, old man. It's a no bet anyway, because you can't match the stake. You yourself don't happen to have a daughter to put up against mine in case you lose, and if you had, I wouldn't want to marry her. I'm glad of that, dear, his wife said. I'll put up anything you like, Pratt announced. My house, for example. How about my house? Which one? Mike asked, joking now. The country one. Why not the other one as well? All right then, if you wish it, both my houses. At that point I saw Mike pause. He took a step forward and placed the bottle in its basket, gently down on the table. He moved the salt cellar to one side, then the pepper, and then he picked up his knife, studied the blade thoughtfully for a moment, and put it down again. His daughter, too, had seen him pause. "Now, Daddy," she cried, "don't be absurd. It's too silly for words. I refuse to be betted on like this." "Quite right, dear," her mother said. "Stop it all at once, Mike, and sit down and eat your food." Mike ignored her. He looked over at his daughter and he smiled, a slow, fatherly, protective smile. But in his eyes, suddenly, there glimmered a little triumph. "You know," he said, smiling as he spoke, "you know, Louise, we ought to think about this a bit." "Now stop it, Daddy. I refuse to even listen to you. Why, I've never heard anything so ridiculous in my life." "No, seriously, my dear. Just wait a moment and hear what I have to say." "But I don't want to hear it." "Louise, please." "It's like this. Richard here has offered us a serious bet. He's the one who wants to make it, not me. And if he loses, he will have to hand over a considerable amount of property. Now, wait a minute, my dear. Wait, don't interrupt. The point is this. He cannot possibly win." Another famous last word sentence here. "He seems to think he can. Now listen to me, because I know what I'm talking about. The expert, when tasting a claret, so long as it is not one of the famous great wines like Lafite or Latour, can only get a certain way towards naming the vineyard. He can, of course, tell you the Bordeaux district from which the wine comes, whether it's from Saint-Emilion, Pomerol, Graves, or Medoc. But then each district has several communes, little counties, and each country has many, many small vineyards. It's impossible for a man to differentiate between them all by taste and smell alone. I don't mind telling you that this one I've got here is a wine from a small vineyard that is surrounded by many other small vineyards, and he'll never get it. It's impossible." "You can't be sure of that," his daughter said. "I'm telling you I can, though I say it myself. I understand quite a bit about this wine business, you know. And anyway, the heavens alive, girl, I'm your father, and you don't think I'd let you in for something you don't want to, do you? I'm trying to make you some money." "Mike," his wife said sharply, "stop it now, Mike, please." Again he ignored her. "If you will take this bet," he said to his daughter, "in 10 minutes you'll be the owner of 2 large houses." "But I don't want 2 large houses, Daddy. Yeah, I don't want to be married to this freaking maniac. But I don't want 2 large houses, Daddy. Then sell them. Sell them back to him on the spot. I'll arrange all that for you. And then just think of it, my dear. You'll be rich. You'll be independent for the rest of your life." Who can say no to that? "Oh, Daddy, I don't like it. I think it's silly." "So do I," the mother said. She jerked her head briskly up and down as she spoke, like a hen. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Michael, even suggesting such a thing. Your own daughter, too." Mike didn't even look at her. "Take it," he said eagerly, staring hard at the girl. "Take it quick. I'll guarantee you won't lose." "But I don't like it, Daddy. Rah. Come on, girl, take it." Mike was pushing her hard. He was leaning towards her, fixing her with 2 hard, bright eyes, and it was not easy for the daughter to resist him. "But what if I lose?" "I keep telling you, you can't lose. I'll guarantee it." "Oh, Daddy, must I?" "I'm making you a fortune, so come on now. What do you say, Louise? All right? Come on, baby. All right?" For the last time she hesitated, and then she gave a helpless little shrug of her shoulders and said, "Oh, all right then. Just so long as you swear there's no danger of losing." "Good," Mike cried. "That's fine. Then it's a bet." "Yes," Richard Pratt said, looking at the girl. "It's a bet." Immediately, Mike picked up the wine, tipped the first thimbleful into his own glass, and then skipped excitedly around the table, filling up the others. Now everyone was watching Richard Pratt, watching his face as he reached slowly for his glass with his right hand and lifted it to his nose. The man was about 50 years old, and he did not have a pleasant face. Somehow it was all mouth and lips. The full, wet lips of the professional gourmet. the lower lip hanging downwards in the center, a pendulous and permanently open taster's lip. Lordy. Shaped open to receive the rim of a glass or a morsel of food. Like a keyhole, I thought. Watching it, his mouth is like a large, wet keyhole. Slowly he lifted the glass to his nose. The point of the nose entered the glass and moved over the surface of the wine, delicately sniffing. He swirled the wine gently around in the glass to receive the bouquet. His concentration was intense. He had closed his eyes, and now the whole top half of his body, the head and neck and chest, seemed to become a kind of huge, sensitive smelling machine, receiving, filtering, analyzing the message from the sniffing nose. Mike, I noticed, was lounging in his chair, apparently unconcerned, but he was watching every move. Mrs. Schofield, his wife, sat prim and upright at the end of the table, looking straight ahead, her face tight with disapproval. The daughter, Louise, had shifted a chair away a little and sideways, facing the gourmet, and she, like her father, was watching closely. For at least a minute the smelling process continued. Then, without opening his eyes or moving his head, Pratt lowered the glass to his mouth and tipped in almost half the contents. He paused, his mouth full of wine, getting the first taste. Then he permitted some of it to trickle down his throat, and I saw his Adam's apple move as it passed by. But most of it he retained in his mouth, and now, without swallowing again, he drew in through his lips a thin breath of air, which mingled with the fumes of the wine in the mouth and passed on down into his lungs. He held the breath, blew it out through his nose, and finally began to roll the wine around under the tongue and chewed it, actually chewed it with his teeth, as though it were bread. It was a solemn, impressive performance, and I must say he did it well. He said, putting down the glass, running a pink tongue over his lips. Yes, a very interesting little wine, gentle and gracious, almost feminine in the aftertaste. There was an excess of saliva in his mouth, and as he spoke he spat an occasional bright speck of it on the table. Now we can start to eliminate, he said. You will pardon me for doing this carefully, but there is much at stake. Normally I would perhaps take a bit of a chance, leaping forward quickly and landing right in the middle of the vineyard of my choice, but this time I must move cautiously this time, must I not? He looked up at Mike and he smiled, a thick-lipped, wet smile. Mike did not smile back. First, then, which district in Bordeaux does this wine come from? That is not too difficult to guess. It is far too light in the body to be from either Saint-Emilion or Graves. It's possibly a Meadow. There's no doubt about that. Now, from which commune in Meadow does it come? That also, by elimination, should not be too difficult to decide. Margaux? No, it cannot be Margaux. It has not the violent bouquet of a Margaux. Pauliac? It cannot be Pauliac. But pardon my pronunciation, guys. Yeah, I don't parlez-vous français. It cannot be Pauliac either. It is too tender, too gentle, and wistful for a Pauliac. The wine of Paula. The wine of Paula has a character that is almost imperious in its taste. And also, to me, a Paula contains just a little pith, a curious, dusty, pithy flavor that the grape acquires from the soil of the district. No. This is a very gentle wine, demure and bashful in the first taste, emerging shyly but quite graciously in the second. A little arch, perhaps, in the second taste, and a little naughty also, teasing the tongue with just a trace, of tannin. Then in the aftertaste, delightful, consoling, and feminine, with a certain blithe, generous quality that one associates only with the wines of the commune of Saint Julien. Unmistakably, this is a Saint Julien. He leaned back in his chair, held his hands up level with his chest, and placed the fingertips carefully together. He was becoming ridiculously pompous, but I thought that some of it was deliberate, simply to mock his host. I found myself waiting rather tensely for him to go on. The girl Louise was lighting a cigarette. Pratt heard the match strike and turned on her, flaring suddenly with real anger. "Please," he said, "please don't do that. It's a disgusting habit to smoke at table." She looked up at him, still holding the burning match in one hand, the big slow eyes settling on his face, resting there a moment, moving away again, slow and contemptuous. She bent her head and blew out the match, but continued to hold the unlighted cigarette in her fingers. "I'm sorry, my dear," Pratt said, "but I simply cannot have smoking at table." She didn't look at him again. "Now, let me see, where were we?" he said. "Ah, yes, the wine from Bordeaux, from the commune of Saint Julien in the district of Meadow. So far, so good. But now we come to the more difficult part, and the name of the vineyard itself. For in Saint Julien there are many vineyards, and as our host so rightly remarked earlier on, there is often not much difference between the wine of one and the wine of another. But we shall see." He paused again, closing his eyes. "I'm trying to establish the growth," he said. "If I can do that, it would be half the battle. Now let me see. This wine is obviously not from a first growth vineyard, nor even a second. It is not a great wine. The quality, the what you call it, the radiance, the power is lacking. But a third growth, that it could be, and yet I doubt it. We know it is a good year, our host has said so, and this is probably flattering it a little bit. I must be careful, I must be very careful here." He picked up his glass and took another small sip. "Yes," he said, sucking his lips. "I was right, it is a fourth growth. Now I'm sure of it. A fourth growth from a very good year, from a great year, in fact. And that's what made it taste for a moment like a third or even a second growth wine. Good, that's better. Now we're closing in. What are the fourth growth vineyards in the commune of Saint Julien?" Good Lord, this guy knows his stuff. Again he paused, took up his glass and held the rim against that sagging, pendulous lower lip of his. Then I saw the tongue shoot out, pink and narrow, the tip of it dipping into the wine, withdrawing swiftly again. A repulsive sight. When he lowered the glass, his eyes remained closed, the face concentrated, only the lips moving, sliding over each other like two pieces of wet, spongy rubber. "There it is again," he cried, "tannin in the middle taste, and the quick, astringent squeeze upon the tongue. Yes, yes, of course, now I have it. This wine comes from one of those small vineyards around Becherville. I remember now, the Becherville district, and the river and the little harbor that has silted up so the wine ships can no longer use it. Becherville. Could it actually be a Becherville itself? No, I don't think so, not quite. But it is somewhere very close. Chateau Talbot? Could it be Talbot? Yes, it could. Wait one moment." He sipped the wine again, and out of the side of my eye, I noticed Mike Schofield and how he was leaning farther and farther forward over the table, his mouth slightly open, his small eyes fixed upon Richard Pratt. "No, I was wrong. It was not a Talbot. A Talbot comes forward to you just a little quicker than this one. The fruit is nearer to the surface. If it is a 34, which I believe it is, then it couldn't be a Talbot. Well, well, let me think. It is not a Becherville, and it is not a Talbot, and yet it is so close to both of them, so close, that the vineyard must be almost in between. Now, which could it be?" He hesitated, and we waited, watching his face. Everyone, even Mike's wife, was watching him now. I heard the maid put down the dish of vegetables on the sideboard behind me, gently so as not to disturb the silence. Ah, he cried, I have it. Yes, I think I have it. For the last time he sipped his wine. Then, still holding the glass up near his mouth, he turned to Mike and he smiled a slow, silky smile. And he said, You know what this is? This is the little Chateau Bronière de Creux. Mike sat tight, not moving. Oh dear. And the year 1934. We all looked at Mike, waiting for him to turn the bottle round on its basket and show the label. Is that your final answer? Mike said. Yes, I think so. Well, is it or isn't it? Yes, it is. What was that name again? Chateau Bronière de Creux. Pretty little vineyard, lovely old chateau, know it quite well. Can't think why I didn't recognize it at once. Come on, Daddy, the girl said. Turn around and let's have a peek. I want my 2 houses. Just a minute, Mike said. Wait just a minute. He was sitting very quiet, bewildered looking, and his face was becoming puffy and pale, as though all the force was draining slowly out of him. Michael, his wife called sharply from the other end of the table. What's the matter? Keep out of this, Margaret, will you please? Richard Pratt was looking at Mike, smiling with his mouth, his eyes small and bright. Mike was not looking at anyone. Daddy, the daughter cried, agonized. But Daddy, you don't mean to say he's guessed it, right? Now, stop worrying, my dear, Mike said. There's nothing to worry about. I think it was more to get away from his family than anything else that Mike then turned to Richard Pratt and said, I'll tell you what, Richard. I think you and I better slip off into the next room and have a little chat. I don't want a little chat, Pratt said. All I want is to see the label on that bottle. He knew he was a winner now. He had the bearing, the quiet arrogance of a winner, and I could see that he was prepared to become thoroughly nasty if there was any trouble. What are you waiting for? He said to Mike. Go and turn it around. Let's see. Then this happened. The maid, the tiny erect figure of the maid in a white and black uniform, was standing beside Richard Pratt, holding something out in her hand. I believe these are yours, sir, she said. Pratt glanced round. He saw the pair of thin horn-rimmed spectacles that she held out to him, and for a moment he hesitated. Oh, are they? Perhaps they are, I don't know. Yes, sir, they're yours. The maid was an elderly woman, nearer 70 than 60, a faithful family retainer of many years' standing. She put the spectacles down on the table beside him. Without thanking her, Pratt took them up and slipped them into his top pocket behind the white handkerchief. But the maid didn't go away. She remained standing beside and slightly behind Richard Pratt, and there was something so unusual in her manner and in the way she stood there, small and motionless and erect, that I for once found myself watching her with a sudden apprehension. Her old grey face had a frosty, determined look. The lips were compressed, the little chin was out, and the hands were clasped together tight before her. The curious cap on her head and the flash of white down the front of her uniform made her seem like a tiny, ruffled, white-breasted bird. You left them in Mr. Schofield's study, she said. Her voice was unnaturally and deliberately polite. On top of the green filing cabinet in his study, sir, when you happened to go in there by yourself before dinner. It took a few moments for the full meaning of her words to penetrate, and in the silence that followed, I became aware of Mike and how he was slowly drawing himself up in his chair, and the color coming to his face, and the eyes opening wide in the curl of the mouth, and the dangerous little patch of whiteness beginning to spread around the area of the nostrils. Now, Michael, his wife said, keep calm now, Michael, dear. Keep calm. Thanks for listening, guys. That was the story Taste by Roald Dahl. I hope you enjoyed it. And let this be a lesson to you. Don't 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 try to one-up people who one-up you. I'm actually not sure what the lesson is. Perhaps have a faithful maid to watch your back should trouble strike. Thanks, guys. Good night.